You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Russ C. asked me on the My History Can Beat Up Your Politics discussion group on Facebook. Vice President Vance just campaigned for the leader of another country. Speaking at a Viktor Orban rally in Hungary, I'm curious if any sort of this thing has happened in recent times. If anyone has similar examples or occurrences, please reference them. And thanks, Ross. And yeah, I would say not exactly. Today's show is brought to you by Vanguard. To all the financial advisors out there, whose job is to help your clients keep more of what they earn, Vanguard is here to help you with that. Vanguard is slashing fees again, this time for more than 50 of its funds. That's on top of big fee cuts they gave last year to investors in 87 of their funds. In an increasingly high-priced world, Vanguard is staying true to excellence without expense. Low fees give Vanguard skilled bond managers more freedom to maneuver as they pursue outperformance. And low fees help you deliver greater value as an advisor. Top performance shouldn't come at a higher cost. Go see the record for yourself at Vanguard.com/impact. That's Vanguard.com/impact. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard Marketing Corporation, distributor. This is a very blatant, public, upfront endorsement an American vice president. There's one example I can think of that's somewhat close in 1983. We'll get into, but not really anything like this is going on. And of course, we're in a new world in a lot of political ways. To be fair, you can also make a statement that, hey, at least it's upfront in public. You probably hear some of that. But it's always a bad idea. And one of the reasons that you don't do it is exactly what happened. Because then, you're using the might of America in a sense and endorsing a candidate. And when that person doesn't win, not only do you have some egg on your face, not only does America look less important in foreign policy and loses that kind of capital that it might need later. Like, for example, people thinking that getting American support is good anymore when this guy lost the election. So you want to risk those situations as little as possible. So you haven't seen presidents do this. But not only that, but now you're facing the person's opponent. The opposing party is now going to be in government, and you now have a country that could have a very stormy relationship with the United States. Now, in the case of Hungary, member of the EU, significant election, by the way, well outside its borders because Orban was causing quite a bit of trouble within the EU and making it difficult to proceed on certain votes. And that's been removed. It's also a problem now for the Trump administration, possibly if there's something like, say, resistance to tariffs, you would have had a more friendly reaction within the EU member states from Orban. And now Hungary would be probably a vote for one of the more extreme measures. Europe does have weapons in any trade war, one that they've been light on. It's not just matching a tariff for tariff. The United States exports far more into Europe than they do here. Much as I like certain German products or certain UK products, I like to get my teas from the UK Parliament, as well as some lovely mint creams that they have. There I go saying UK when they're not a member anymore. There's some German products that I like. Not really important. We're sending an awful lot there. We always forget about farming is America's export, among other things. It is heavily subsidized. So it's really where it doesn't get counted in fair trade equations, but it's extremely unfair trade to be subsidizing an industry and then dumping exports, if you will, all over the world. And that's why I, as a trade supporter, I don't like using even terms like dumping unless it's really, really going on, in a very decisive way that you're going to bring the prices up later. Because, we can start to see trade as something hostile when really I need something. I give you money. You give it to me. It's empowering for me to be a consumer. But anyway, where did I go on a sidetrack? So no, that's why you don't do this. However, what we're really seeing is just a more blatant version of things that have gone on, because an American president has many levers and devices to use to influence what could be elections around the world. And yes, you must state that there have been proven occasions, release files and such, that take Chile 73, take Iran in the 1950s, where covert operations unseated governments. Usually it's more subtle. So all of those times that you see Reagan and Thatcher together, a president can make his schedule, and his choice to appear side by side with Thatcher is important. And to do it so many times, to fit so many visits into your schedule, and it's mutual too. It wasn't all benefit to Thatcher. Reagan also benefited by having an ally next to him as he's confronting the Soviets with a very hard stance at the time. We'll talk about that in the most recent episodes of the Ronald Reagan series, which I hope you're listening to. Those choices are strategic often. President's schedule is a diplomatic weapon. Air Force One. Actually, since Kennedy got, a high-speed plane, that's been seen as a kind of weapon in foreign policy, the appearance of a president, or the denial of such. So Harold Wilson, the Labour Prime Minister in the 60s of the United Kingdom, asks Lyndon Johnson for like a joint appearance. And that's where Lyndon Johnson, who's angered with Wilson, because Wilson would not support the Vietnam War effort. He certainly wouldn't send troops, but he wouldn't even issue like a UK, support of the U.S. operation in Vietnam. Vietnam was very unpopular in the United Kingdom, particularly among the Labour Party, which is the more left party in politics there. And so Lyndon Johnson says, we don't need to be, flapping our coattails in the wind. And he didn't want to do it. It's particularly interesting to watch the UK, because in UK politics, partially because of Churchill and Roosevelt, and you can take that into Reagan and Thatcher in its strongest modern sense, Clinton and Blair a little, Bush and Blair quite a bit. And they have a term in British politics called the special relationship. I always find this one funny because I listen to UK politics, the BBC, and I just love Ian Dale's Cross Question, which is a daily podcast right outside of Parliament. And they always talk about the special relationship with the United States. And we, I'm sorry to say, so rarely hear talk about the special relationship with the United Kingdom. I mean, occasionally, and that doesn't mean like we hate the UK. I think it's one of the top countries. They're just kind of, for Americans, one of the first things they think about, where we moved on from the whole, thing 250 years ago. But it's not like the same special relationships in politics that it is on the UK side. What that means in practical terms is for a United Kingdom Prime Minister, currently Keir Starmer, the Labour government, it is a part of your report card how well you're getting along with the U.S. You have very little control over it. You have some control over it. It's mostly up to the mood of the American administration. And that's a lever that they can use to control a prime minister's fortune. So right now that Trump is angry with Keir Starmer over the Iran and not letting him use the bases, except for defensive purposes, he makes the comment, "You're no Winston Churchill." And that got some traction in the UK. And it's among elites, among power brokers, among people who want to see the UK prime minister as like a strong leader. It's an important point. It doesn't work the other way. Nobody here cares what Keir Starmer thinks of Trump, a very few people. But it does work the other way a bit, particularly, again, in those elite and in media opinions of how well a prime minister is doing. So in the beginning of 2025, when actually there were several promising meetings between Starmer and Trump and looked like they were getting along, and then he got the 5% break on the tariff that he stuck to the EU. So it looked, Keir Starmer could brag about a good special relationship, and now he can't. Well, what's changed, too, is the poll ratings of Donald Trump in the United Kingdom and the EU are quite low. So Keir Starmer really can finesse that. It's still a little bit of a concern. So you see the weapon, the diplomatic weapon that American president can have just by standing next to a person. During his presidency, James Carville makes several appearances with Yeltsin, knowing that he's going to be a candidate for his reelection soon. He does not endorse Yeltsin. He does not. There is an assertion that, he sent James Carville over. I even think I made that once, and that's an error. But there were some lesser political consultants that had worked with Clinton that go to Russia and are hired by the Yeltsin campaign. So that was one of the early examples of a U.S. president maybe indirectly sending some help to the Yeltsin campaign. Back in the 80s, if you look at El Salvador, the Americans were heavily involved in soliciting Jose Napoleon Duarte, getting him to run in the presidential election of 84, and, how much influence they had on him winning. All those facts haven't all been revealed, but there seems to be a lot of behind-the-scenes work. Now, what was so special about Jose Napoleon Duarte? Well, not only was he going to be a bulwark against the Soviets, which is the first requirement for Reagan administration, looking to turn Central and South America to anti-Soviet, and of course Duarte would do that, but so would the right-wing government. And essentially it comes down to Duarte was a little bit more moderate, that maybe he'd push back on the military a little bit, and as a former president had the political gravitas to credibly run for El Salvador president. And they hoped he'd be a little bit better. He had this land, we got into it in one of our episodes, he had this land distribution system that unfortunately really didn't distribute much land to the people, but it still did something that big landowners in El Salvador didn't want, and that made a few people angry with him. It's like, okay, well, this guy pushes back once in a while, so let's help him. Reagan appears with him after he's president, try to stabilize his administration, show that it's happy, things are happy. James Baker during George H.W. Bush's administration was famously involved in what in Israeli politics in 1990 was called the stinking trick. And my Hebrew pronunciation would not be good enough to translate it, but the stinking trick. And it was a way to get Simon Peres the support he needed to take over the government while the government prime minister seat had been vacated, and the Knesset was deciding who would be the prime minister, try to get some of the small religious parties to back Perez. How many phone calls were made from the State Department? A lot of that not known. We think there was some involvement. People in Israeli, the Likud party thinks there was a lot of involvement to get the Likud prime minister Yitzhak Shamir out and Simon Peres in, because the United States said, we need to start negotiating on peace, and we're going to withhold certain support unless you do. And that created a crisis in the government. So, indirect way, Baker was able to almost pull off this thing. What happened is the religious parties that were needed in this deal to make Perez the leader of the country, there was they ended up backing out. And so Likud remained. But that was definitely seen as involvement, U.S. involvement in a foreign election. When it comes to referendum and domestic votes, so you have, of course, recently President Obama weighing in on Brexit, which was not welcome in most of the UK. I don't think it was a strong comment on his part, but it was more expressing, American preference, but not welcome. And Bill Clinton on Quebec's 1995 referendum, which it was so tight for remaining in Canada that Bill Clinton's comment that he'd like to see Quebec in Canada probably helped, because Bill Clinton was more popular than the Republican presidents had been in Quebec, which tends to have very more liberal politics. Now, again, there's all of that stuff, and I think that through aid, certainly we can support or not support an incumbent government and show we don't have to always send the vice president out. But there was a case where we sent the vice president out. This is the 1983 elections I talked about in the Reagan series, where Vice President Bush did go out and make speeches friendly to the Christian Democrats in Germany, Helmut Kohl's party, and unhelpful to the position of the SDP, because that was the party that was going to place counter missiles to the Soviet missiles in Germany, and the other party would not do it. So Bush's appearance is credited there, and also in the Italian elections with electing, say, the right candidates in order to help. I'll leave that one there.
Spring is here, and with it comes the perfect opportunity to cultivate the beautiful home lawn you've always wanted with Hearn Seed. Start this season right by choosing only the highest quality turfgrass seed from a family-owned company in business since 1938. Go over to hearnseed.com and use promo code SPRING10 to receive 10% off your turfgrass seed order.